Welcome to EPG Pathshala. We are discussing the module titled Depiction of Women-Centric Issues. The objectives of this particular module are to outline the major issues that affect the lives of women, to understand what kind of issues are mostly taken up by the media, to understand how the media presents the chosen issues, to identify the possible reasons for the choice of issues and their depiction, and in the end, to discuss the impact of media and its portrayal of issues, the kind of impact it has on women and society at large. As you have studied in this unit so far, the depiction of women by the media is crucial in shaping the discourse around the position of women in the society and their role in it. We shall be discussing the issues, the broad major issues that are faced by women today. We'll also be talking about what kind of issues the media picks up, in what light does the media show them, and why does it do so, the possible reasons for their choice and their choice of representation of these issues. In the end, we would be talking about the kind of impact this representation is having, this portrayal is having on the society at large and women in particular. Women have long been the oppressed in societies around the world. Exploitation and suppression of women is not limited to underdeveloped or developing countries. The most advanced countries in terms of economy also treat their women unequally on many fronts. India boasts of the high regard its culture gave to women in ancient times. Although ancient texts and beliefs may partially suggest equal treatment of women in the society, but age-old practices like sati, widows' societal exclusion, child marriages, dowry, denial of any claim to ancestral property are a testimony to the sorry state of women in the land of female deities. However, with the education, exposure to various cultures and proliferation of pro-women media messages, the societal attitudes towards women has changed a lot. Government interventions in the form of policies and laws, supportive schemes in areas of female education, health, and livelihood have also helped in strengthening the position of women. With increasing awareness of their rights and abilities, women themselves are playing a role in their empowerment. On one hand, issues like child marriage have almost been controlled over time with education and laws. On the other hand, there are many problems like dowry, which despite strict laws and awareness continue to penetrate deeper in the society. Certain issues, honor killings for example, are against the law of the land but are upheld by communities and their self-governing bodies. In addition to these problems, there are many other issues which were not very common in the past, but with changes in the socio-economic environment in the country, they are becoming issues demanding wide social attention. Problems like work-life balance, uneven wage structure among men and women, especially in the unorganized lower-end jobs, lack of security in both rural and urban spaces have come up in a worryingly big way. It is very important to know the main issues which women face before we go on to studying the issues which are taken up by the media. A brief overview of these issues are given in this unit. There are 7 major issues we would be covering in this section. The first one being women's health. Health is one of the 3 dimensions of the human development given by United Nations besides education and standard of living. Life expectancy at birth has been chosen as the indicator of the status of health in any country. Women with the responsibility of childbearing and rearing need to pay much more attention to their health, which is unfortunately not possible in most cases, particularly in rural and semi-urban areas. The reasons for poor health of women are many. Reasons include poor diet during growing up years, early and multiple pregnancies, cost of healthcare facilities, compulsion to physically overwork their bodies, etc. Women ignore their own health due to financial constraints and lack of awareness. The next issue is women's education. As mentioned in the previous point, education is the second dimension of human development in the Human Development Index. The chosen indicators to access the status of education to assess women's education. As mentioned in the previous point, education is the second dimension of human development in the Human Development Index. The chosen indicators to assess the status of education of a particular country are mean years of schooling and expected years of schooling. In India, although over 65% female literacy has been achieved, but as the quality of education varies widely between urban and rural areas, this figure cannot be regarded as satisfactory. Also, as most families still regard their daughters' education to be a secondary matter, most girls, despite being formally schooled, are never able to use their education productively to their benefit. Coming on to the third point, the cultural preference for male children. Although this problem appears to have vanished in urban areas, but rural and semi-urban households continue to endorse their preference for sons openly. Even in urban areas, families are getting sophisticated and hence do not voice their liking for sons, but the gender ratio tilting heavily in favor of boys, illegal abortions of female fetuses, and the insignificant say of daughters in family matters clearly indicate the problem is present even in educated and financially well-off families. The preferential treatment given to boys over girls in rural areas is widespread and well known to all. The fourth point is financial dependence. This is probably the most significant factor in holding women back from claiming their fair place in the society. Their financial dependence on men. As most families do not pay much attention to daughters' education, girls are not able to develop essential skills which would provide them a respectable source of income. Also, the cultural environment in most families is such that they condition their daughters to secure their lives through marriage rather than employment. In fact, many girls, even those with proper education, consider marriage as the most important prospect of their lives, with employment being a comparatively unimportant matter. The fifth point is the dowry system. The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines dowry as money or property that a wife or wife's family gives to her husband when the wife and husband marry in some cultures. Anthropologist Jack Goody defines dowry as the practice of transferring of parental property to the daughter at the time of a marriage. The definition clarifies the origin and purpose of the system. However, with time, the custom has become an evil practice wherein the groom's side blackmail the bride's family to offer dowry beyond their ability. The greed for dowry leads to emotional and physical torture of the bride by the husband and his family, and in some cases ends up in abetment to suicide or even killing of the girl. The deep-rooted nature of dowry in our society is primarily responsible for the unwillingness of parents to invest in a daughter's education or giving her a share in ancestral property. Moving on to the next point, which is gender pay gap. Although it has been mentioned in previous points that employment is not a priority with most women, still they form a very significant part of the workforce. This is particularly true in low-end jobs like those of agricultural laborers, construction workers, domestic helps, factory workers, and the like. In almost all these jobs, women are paid less than men despite the fact that they work with more dedication. ILO's Global Wage Report of 2014 and 15 points towards the widening gender pay gap in high-end jobs as well. This trend is present even in the most elite commercial rewards, which include the prize money of reputed sports championships, fees of actors and actresses, and celebrity endorsements. The last point is violence against women. One of the most highlighted issues of today, the problem has grown into a social malady. Starting from domestic violence at home to incidents of harassment, acid attacks, rape, and even murder of women are becoming the order of the day. Although very strict laws have been framed and implemented in this regard, but the problem remains almost unaffected. It is becoming increasingly difficult for women to normally live and work and enjoy the freedom which their male counterparts have. Having discussed the major issues faced by women in our society, let us now move on to those issues which the media chooses to take up. Once we have identified the kind of issues usually taken up by the mass media, we would be able to understand the kind of audience they target and for what purpose. It would also tell us a lot about the attitudes and likings of viewers in general. We will look at the most highlighted issues in different kinds of media, taking one at a time. We begin with issues highlighted in films. If we take a look at commercial films made in the past decade, we would see that the female characters have evolved into much bolder, independent, and fearless heroines as compared to the characters of the 70s, 80s, and even 90s. However, if we observe closely, we see that the depiction of central conflicts in their lives almost remains the same. Barring a few exceptions, the female lead remains as a supportive element of the male lead. Most of the issues that have been taken up in recent films seem to be very urban in nature or borrowed from the West. For example, live-in relationships, adultery, single parenting, bearing a child out of wedlock, etc. There are examples where issues like violence against women and their harassment have come up, but they are more of exceptions than the norms. There are very few films which portray a female character as a socially, economically, and emotionally independent individual. It's evident from the chosen issues that filmmakers target an urban, upper middle class audience, as the grassroots issues are mostly left out. Also, the influence of Hollywood films suggests that most films are focused on the tastes and preferences of the younger audiences. These are college-going students and young working people for whom the Western films and culture have aspirational status. As women from this class are far more privileged than the majority of the female population, the issues concerning the majority remain untouched. We now move on to issues highlighted in television. We first take up the news programs. When it comes to news around women and their problems, the news programs on television are primarily centered on violence. News about rape, murders, and honor killings appear almost on a daily basis. Only when some major development takes place in the areas of health, education, or livelihood of women, for example, the launching of new schemes or unveiling of international reports, the news finds place on television. It's obvious that cultural issues like preference for the male child, non-involvement of girls in family matters hold no news value. Also, problems like health and education are so widespread that few aspects could be newsworthy. But there are numerous 24-hour news channels running soft stories during non-primetime hours, but these glaring issues do not find place even in those time slots. It is important to focus on hard news around women, but it is also the duty of the media to give space to the seemingly non-newsworthy issues that are affecting majority of women in our country. Now, moving on to the issues highlighted in entertainment programs on television. Entertainment programs on television are primarily targeted towards women. Almost all current soap operas and sitcoms on various channels have a female protagonist. But the newsworthy point is that despite the ability to take up cultural issues and present them to a wide audience, television programs are still struggling with narratives of romance, marriage, and living happily ever after. Even the programs that begin with strong women-centric themes end up as Cinderella stories in varied settings. It is ironical that we can find plots and characters based on novels of Jane Austen on Indian television, but almost no shows about the hardships that millions of women in India are facing today. Even the serials based on actual historical characters are overshadowed with romantic overtones. It's surprising how quite a few shows are coming up with almost non-existent issues like child marriage or child widows, but next to none are being made around any of the issues discussed in the beginning of this module. Issues highlighted in the print media. The print media mainly include newspapers and magazines. Newspapers, having the same criteria as news channels, take up similar issues. Although the flexibility to localize content gives newspapers the ability to cover a wider range of issues. This is usually done in the form of features and investigative reports. Women magazines, on the other hand, are completely focused on an elite urban audience, particularly the ones in English. Hence, most of these magazines carry only fashion and entertainment news, gossip columns, and grooming tips. When we discuss Hindi or other regional language magazines, it is obvious that the target audience are from their respective regions. Also, as most women from the upper class or upper middle class prefer to go with English magazines, regional magazines find their readers in middle class women. Although most of the content is around films, entertainment, grooming, and housekeeping, some cultural issues are raised and sometimes challenged in short stories which form an integral part of these magazines. Moving on to the issues highlighted in online or social media. Online and social media, though penetrating very fast, are still dominated by the elite class, that is, the ones with access to the internet, a computer or a smartphone, and basic skills to use these devices and navigate in the online space. This feature of online media is clearly reflected in the women-centric issues that are raised on this platform. Among the issues discussed in the beginning of this chapter, it is mostly violence that occupies maximum space. Another major discussion that takes place on social platforms is that of liberation of women, which includes the liberty to choose a life partner, liberty to have or not have children, breaking out of stereotypes, freedom to choose their lifestyle, etc. The issues, though very significant, cannot be considered to represent the problems of majority of women. Most of the themes on social media are initiated and guided by the interests of advertisers. Many discussions are centered on the themes of upcoming films. With deeper penetration of internet and social media, it can be expected that the coverage of women-centric issues would not be limited to the educated urban population. Up till now, we have discussed the most important issues which affect majority of the women in our country and which of those issues are highlighted by the media. We saw that media also take up other issues which, though concerning a smaller section of female population, are relevant in the modern times. Before we analyze how the media presents chosen issues, we must understand that there are some messages which are conveyed in a direct manner, while some messages are conveyed through the setting of a film, the traits of a character, and other indirect ways. Some messages may not be intended but get conveyed inadvertently. The indirect and inadvertent messages are as important, if not more, than the direct messages of a film, TV show, or article. One needs to be exposed to a broad social milieu in order to go beyond the ordinary and identify the deeply ingrained social traits that are present in media content by reading against the grain. If we look at popular films of the past decade, we find that mostly very urban, cultural issues have been taken up. The good part is that many social taboos have been shown in very acceptable and positive ways. In some cases, the film could be based around an issue. For example, the film Salam Namaste targeted the issues of sharing of living space between an unmarried couple. On the other hand, some films weave in an issue in the background. As example, we can take the film Partner, where one of the female leads is shown to be a single mother. But this aspect does not interfere with the storyline. It is shown as a natural situation which needs no highlighting. The downside of films is that issues involving rural, semi-urban, or socio-economically disadvantaged women are not being taken up. With television, soap operas become the most important part of the bouquet of programs when we are discussing the depiction of women-centric issues. With housewives and college-going girls comprising the target audience, the themes naturally revolve around urban and semi-urban women from conventional families. The dearth of issues on such a broad medium is not the only worrisome aspect. The more serious shortcoming of television content lies in the fact that plots of almost all the soap operas, irrespective of the issues taken up, turn into a predictable fabula of a woman being pursued by a worthy suitor. Also, the presentation of certain aspects on screen leads to partial glorification of the issue rather than highlighting the actual problems. A very widely discussed example of this problem is the daily soap Balika Vadhu, which began with a little girl being forcefully married to a child of an affluent family. While the script tried to depict how the girl had to leave her studies because of her marriage, other elements of the show highlighted the opulence in a new world in comparison to her own home. The loving parents of the boy, that is her in-laws, her colorful clothes and jewelry, etc. Experts pointed out that the life of the little girl post her marriage, despite the projected hardships, was depicted in such a manner that the issue of child marriage appeared rather palatable to little girls of middle-class families watching the show. Discussions on online media continue to be the prerogative of educated urban women from the upper middle class, as the medium is such that the rest of the population either does not have access to or lacks the skills to participate in any discourse in the online space. As Marshall McLuhan puts it, medium is the message. That is, the choice of the medium is symbolically related to the content of the message and how it is perceived. It is therefore not surprising to see only a certain kind of content and discussions on various websites. Internet is a very powerful medium when there is a need to garner support of the younger population for a cause. This was evident when strict regulations regarding women's safety were passed after the Nirbhaya incident in 2012. However, when we look at general women-centric discussions that take place on online platforms, we find that most of the circulated articles or videos talk about how the society must break stereotypes pertaining to marriage, parenting, lifestyle, etc. This obviously is an extremely narrow view of the problems faced by women, considering the fact that only the women very high up in the social hierarchy are affected by these issues. Also, the one thing which is mostly ignored, even on an elite medium like internet, is the necessity of women to be socially and financially independent. This is one aspect where women themselves need to act, but it is least discussed. Overall, we see that while the media on one hand has been able to break stereotypes and mobilize youth, creating a more open and conducive culture for the modern women, on the other hand, it has reinforced some cultural mindsets and also ignored the problems of women who do not have an education or live below a particular economic threshold. As per the agenda-setting theory of media, media hold the power to influence the agenda of governments and decision-makers. The issues they highlight tend to occupy center stage in public discourses and hence become the priority issues for common people. Therefore, it can be said that the overlooking of issues of women at the bottom of the social pyramid has led to their further marginalization. Therefore, it can be said that the overlooking of issues of women at the bottom of the social pyramid has led to their further marginalization. The power of the media is such that it can interfere with the entire cultural fabric of a society. Television is the most powerful medium when discussing women and their problems, as women form the largest chunk of the television audience. The audience of soap operas are vulnerable and impressionable, as most of them are non-working women from upper middle class and middle class households who have little exposure to the problems other women face. While most of the shows try to do justice to a chosen issue, in order to garner maximum TRPs, they tend to work more towards making the show likable by this section of the audience. As most women watch television as an escape from their daily routines, the producers keep on infusing their shows with more surreal elements to capture their attention. Therefore, a storyline around a middle-class girl single-handedly supporting her family eventually turns into a story of a beautiful girl being wooed by the owner of the company she works for. Similarly, the story of an estranged single mother getting remarried turns into a colorful showcase of wedding attire, parties, and honeymoon destinations. It's not so that all films or shows take a predictable turn without doing justice to the central theme of the script. But as our discussion is about how media in general depict issues concerning women, we need to consider media content meant for the masses instead of focusing on boutique content. It can be said the mass media is more powerful than it ever was, but the content is guided heavily by commercial interests of producers. As a result, the content gets concentrated on the socio-economically well-off sections, while the weaker sections are portrayed either inaccurately or left out altogether. This leads to an ill-informed audience, particularly women, as their perception of the world outside their own is largely shaped by the media. An ill-informed or misinformed population is the biggest impediment that comes in the way of a true democracy. A healthy public sphere is the foundation of a socially, culturally, and financially sound society, and the media needs to play its part in creating the same. So we saw in this unit that women have been oppressed by men in societies around the world. They don't have equal rights and opportunities in many countries even today. Although in our country they do have equal rights and opportunities, but there are several cultural factors which curtail them from getting their rightful role, rightful position in the society. Despite strict constitutional provisions against evil practices like dowry, female feticide, domestic violence, right to ancestral property, these problems not only continue to persist, but they are growing deeper. The most important problems affecting the women today include that of health, education, livelihood, the gender pay gap, equal access to property rights in the family. There are many such issues which were discussed in this unit, but we saw that the media, barring a few exceptions, chose to leave the broader issues altogether and focus on a few niche issues in their programming, especially in the entertainment programs. We saw that the reason for this was the interest of the advertisers and producers to focus on the socioeconomically well-off people in the society. Although profit margins are a very important part in keeping the media up and running, but having the responsibility of projecting the right image of the society and having the power to influence the society, the media needs to play a much more important role in projecting the women more accurately, more honestly, especially the women at the bottom of the pyramid in our country. Thank you.